From the New Testament. Today we are looking at Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 24. Now, one Sabbath, when Jesus went to dine at the house of a leader of the Pharisees, they were watching him closely. There, right in front of him, was a man suffering from dropsy. So Jesus asked the experts in the religious law and the Pharisees, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent, so Jesus took a hold of the man, healed him, and sent him away. Then he said to them, which of you, if you have a son, or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? But they could not reply to this. Then, when Jesus noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. He said to them, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, because a person more distinguished than you may have been invited by your host. So the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this man your place. And then ashamed, you will begin to move to the least important place. But when you are invited, go and take the least important place, so that when your host approaches you, he will say, friend, move up here to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who share the meal with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. He said also to the man who had invited him, when you host a dinner banquet, don't invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, so that you can be invited by them in return and get repaid. But when you are host an elaborate meal, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Then you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, and you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. When one of those at the meals with Jesus heard this, he said, blessed is everyone who will feast in the kingdom of God. But Jesus said to him, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time for the banquet, he sent a slave to tell those who had been invited, come, because everything is now ready. But one after another they all began to make excuses. The first one said, I have bought a field and I must go out to see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to examine them. Please excuse me. Another said, I just got married and I cannot come. So the slave came back and reported this to the master. Then the master of the household was furious. He said to the slave, go out quickly to the streets and alleys of the city, and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Then the slave said, sir, what you have instructed has been done, and there is still room. So the master said to the slave, go out to the highways and to the country, urge people to come in, so that my house will be filled. For I tell you, not one of those individuals who were invited will taste my banquet. So Jesus is in this passage. Jesus is talking. It happens at a dinner, and he's talking about banquets and dinners and honor and how that works. And that's sometimes something that we may not exactly understand in our culture, because we don't use the same language, but we do some of the same things. Because really, in that culture, you wanted the best place. You wanted the highest profile. We still do that in our culture, but in that culture, it was done through where you sat at a meal. And what meals you went to, and who you invited to your meals, so that they would invite you back. And Jesus really challenges all of that and says, that's worthless. Instead, don't worry about what other people can do for you. And in fact, invite people to your banquets, your parties, your dinner, into your home to eat meals with you that have nothing to offer you, because that's not what it means to live in the kingdom of God. In the kingdom of God, it's not about, well, I need to have the highest place. Jesus says, take the lowest place. And we say, well, Jesus said, take the lowest place so that you could have a higher place. But I think as we read throughout these parables, Jesus is saying that because he's trying to make it clear. If it's about what place you sit in, if it's about your standing, then you're missing out. He tells people that, it's not about those things. And then he tells a parable where you have someone who has created this feast, and the people that were invited didn't show up, and instead he goes out and invites other people who are just from the area. And as I think about that, one of the things I'm always reminded of is how in the Jewish mind, and it shows up in this passage, the idea of heaven, the idea of the kingdom of God is a feast. And I'm reminded of, it's not a biblical parable, but it's a parable of how both in heaven and hell there's a banquet table. And they're identical. The utensils on the banquet table are also identical. And they are forks and spoons that are 3 foot long. And it is said that the people in heaven, they are well fed and they enjoy the feast. But the people in hell, they starve. Even though they have the same feast, the same table in front of them. Because they are not willing to feed other people, but instead look to themselves. And I think that the idea here is, the kingdom of heaven is different. We aren't supposed to operate based on status. We aren't supposed to operate based on what other people can offer me or you or any of that. We are supposed to operate in love, and love that does not count what someone else can do. That's not love. That's really just, looking at people as objects. And Jesus tells us that's not the way to do. That's not the way to act. And so, as I think about this, I'm constantly come back to the question, how do I live my life? Am I looking at people in terms of what they can do for me? Am I looking at situations in terms of how it can help me? Or do I choose to look at things in terms of how can this be a situation I can bring the love of God into? How can this be a situation that I can help in? And how can I be a blessing to others? When it comes down to it, if we are followers of Jesus, we are called to be a blessing to others. We are called to serve others. And when we don't do that, we end up looking a lot more like those Pharisees, like those people who sought honor, like the people who said, well, I'm going to show up, and then when they're invited, they don't. I pray that we would be a people who live out the love of God in a very generous way, that we would be a people who exemplify the generosity of God in all we do. Hope you guys are doing well. Have a wonderful day.